Well, the Nova was running, now it's not. Stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage, and well, we're back to talk about the EFI setup on the Nova. Before we get into that though, a big shout out to our sponsors, one of them being ICT Billet, who helped out with the battery relocation, and I've gotten a lot of the connectors. They're a great source of some place to go to buy the connectors for IAT, ECT, any of the sensors that you want. They have a nice selection of connectors, so check out ICT Billet. There's a link down in the description down below. Without those guys, projects like this just would not be possible, so I wanted to make sure and give a big shout out. And as I said, we'll take a look at the battery relocation in the trunk. Really happy with it. And the nice thing about it is running the Optima battery, I kind of got it mounted at an angle, but it doesn't matter because those Optimas, as long as you don't mount them upside down, they'll mount about any direction that you want. And it freed up some room for the ECU in the engine bay, and we'll take a look at that. But let's talk about what's going on. So, as you know, we had the Holley Sniper on there. There was the issue with the wideband controller on the Sniper itself. Everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people know about this. This is a common issue. You've got to send it in to have Holley do service on it. Well, it's not my unit in the first place. So, you know, I still want to call Holley and kind of ask them about it. And I'll be a little bit honest, I'm kind of disappointed in Holley right now, and you're about to find out why. So what did we do? We ended up installing the Aem 7 series. It's the 710, even though we only needed the 708. I got the 710 for a good deal, so I thought I would throw it in there. And I'm really happy with a lot of stuff that's going on with it. Maybe not so much with Aem right now because one, their forums are down for some reason. Literally the day after I started this swap, the forums just went offline. And so to try and find information on the forums requires you to go through Google, search it in Google, and look at the cached view of it. And I reached out to them and said, hey, when are the forums coming back up? And their own support staff was like, oh, we didn't even know they were down. So, yeah. Then on top of it, I had some very specific questions that I asked about a coil driver, and they just kind of responded, yeah, it should work. I was like, well, that's not what I asked. I asked, how is this thing supposed to be wired up? Because in all of your documentation, you only show this coil driver being used, not this one. You know, and the difference is one of them's the single coil driver, which they don't sell anymore, so you can't really get your hands on it. So I got the 3 output coil driver, but it doesn't have the same inputs and outputs on it, and I can't get clarification on what I'm supposed to do as far as that goes. Therein lies the problem. If you watch the previous video, I'll throw a link up in the corner. I always point to the wrong corner, so I'm going to point to both. I'll throw a link up in the corner to that one. I showed you that I was going to use the Holley Sniper coil driver. And the idea behind it is that if you have a Sniper and you don't want to run a CDI box, you can actually run this little module, and it takes your points output from your Sniper and then triggers the coil, just your ignition coil. So why we were running on this is because the Aem is locked into a falling edge trigger, which means that it sparks whenever it goes to 0. Well, the CDI box sparks whenever it sees the voltage go up. And so by running a coil driver, it effectively inverts that. And it sort of worked, but there was some issues from the get-go. Thing would fire up and run great for about 5-10 seconds, and then all of a sudden it would just start missing. Originally, I thought it was an issue with the dual sync and the signal from the crank getting back to the ECM. And man, I tried everything, moving power, ground leads, isolating, running shielded twisted pair for the crank signal, all this stuff, nothing made a difference. Then I finally just got frustrated, took the alternator belt off, and it fixed it. So I thought, man, it's still an RFI issue. Let's go ahead and try a new alternator. Yep, threw the alternator on there. Same problem. Still just at that point in time, I'm getting very frustrated, and I'm at my like 20th time of cranking this thing over, trying different filtering settings, stuff like that. Then the fan kicks on, and everything works fine with the fan on. That's where it gets very interesting. Now, I've talked to some electrical engineers about this. Why would this be? Nobody has a straight answer. What it boils down to, though, is that there was something wrong with the Holley coil driver. And the fan technically was on the same circuit. It was on an accessory circuit, which was driven by a relay to say that the car was on. That way, the coil driver would only be powered, and the fan would only be powered whenever the car was on. And I was able to replicate it because I have a temperature switch shutting the fan on and off. I bypassed the temperature switch. Whenever the fan was running, the coil driver worked perfectly fine. Once again, went through, changed circuits, power circuits, ground circuits, all this stuff on the coil driver, it never worked right. In fact, whenever I took it off the circuit that was on the fan and moved it over to its own dedicated circuit, it wouldn't work anymore with the fan on. So I finally break down. I said, you know what? I'm just going to take the CDI box out of the picture. The design behind this coil driver is that it should drive a coil directly. And so I wired up the coil, power to it, the coil driver on the other side, fired up. It ran all right. Not the best. It wasn't as good as it was before running the CDI box. And it ran decently for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then it smoked the coil driver. It literally started melting. The car shut off, never got spark after that again. So it all kind of wraps back into the fact that we probably had a bad coil driver, and it is a Holley unit. And my guess is if I were trying to send it into those guys to get it fixed, they're going to tell me, well, you weren't using this in a way that was intended, even though whenever it's driving a CDI box like that, there's almost no load on that coil driver. And that might be part of the problem of what was causing it to not work properly, is that circuit did not have enough load on it for some reason. I'm sure some of you guys will have some thoughts, opinions. By all means, share them down below. And that reminds me, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and throw a thumbs up if you enjoy this. Now let's take a look. We'll look at the battery relocation. Ignore the trunk, it's a little bit messy. There's a bunch of wires everywhere, but I want you to take a look at this ICT bracket because I really like how it turned out. So here's our ICT relocation setup, and they sent me the one that actually works specifically with the Ultima, and so it has the brackets on both sides that hold the battery down without the one going across the top. It looks great. I really like it. Ignore my kind of wiring mess I've got going on here for my stereo. I wish I cared about as much as the wiring, how it looked in the trunk, as I do in the engine bay. But I'll be honest with you, the trunk is being used for storage right now. I'll come back in here one of these days and clean some of this stuff up and get some of this wire up out of the way and properly ran. But for now, I just did want to take a moment and show you. I've got to get my gasket or my grommets. I'm having a hard time because of the thickness of the trunk floorboard because it's double layer metal, getting grommets in there. But I actually have some bulkhead cord grips that I think I'm going to run over them and use those to tighten that down. And this is actually a secondary circuit that I ran up during testing. Normally that wouldn't need to be there because the power is ran all the way up to the starter lug, and then on the ground, I've got the ground going underneath onto the chassis point, and then from that chassis point, I've got another ground wire that goes up to the engine block. So just things to do to make sure that we have good continuity all the way through. And even without the one going from the chassis ground here up to the block, I was getting less than 1 ohm of resistance throughout the entire car on the ground leg. So it should have been all right. That's not a lot in this situation, but by doing the additional ground wire, we bring that down to 0.8, 0.7 ohms. Okay, here's how our setup turned out. And in fact, I ended up going over to a 92mm throttle body from the 102 because even when I had the thing running, I had a hard time getting the thing to really want to idle properly and transition properly whenever I was blipping the throttle. So just grabbed a cheap one to throw on there and an air filter just to make sure I wasn't sucking up any crap because I was doing a little bit of grinding on a couple parts in here. But as you can see, I've got my IAC and my TPS going back to one of my Deutsch connectors from customconnectorkits.com. I used ICT billets injector plugs down on this side. Same ordeal. I got ICT billets map sensor and IAT on the back of the elbow, and then again down on the ECT, which is on this side of the block because I've got the manual or the mechanical gauge down on that side of the block. But everything goes straight back into a Deutsch connector. Back here on the back, same ordeal. This is my cam crank signal, my injectors, all that stuff has a Deutsch connector. So for the most part, I can disconnect the harness from this point back and pull the whole harness back. Getting over here, it's a little bit messy in this area still because I haven't kind of wrapped up and bundled this up. This is where our coil our coil driver. This is where our coil driver was hooked up originally, and it was run back over into our digital 6A box back there. So as I said, originally I was worried because we have a lot of the harnesses running kind of near our coil and our distributor and stuff like that. But being that our coil wires, our actual spark plug wires are off to the side, and for the most part we're perpendicular, we're not parallel to those really shouldn't be causing much of an issue. And I don't think that was the problem. It's never really been the problem. I think, as I said from the get-go, our coil driver was the issue. Oh, by the way, where the battery was located here is where I ended up locating the AEM unit. I'm not sure if you can see. Let me move the camera over. So this is where I ended up locating the Aem unit. Made for a nice location to have the two big harnesses coming off that I kind of wrap together into the one and then break them out over here. And then we've got our distribution block that comes for Aem, and so we've got main power, and then this is like our 5-volt circuit power. I can't remember what the 10 is. And then these are auxiliary circuits that are controlled by our main relay here. Whenever we turn the ignition on, this relay closes out and it energizes these circuits. On top of it, I ran some of that over to our cheap Chinese relay box that I had nothing but problems with. Even though I'm using the proper crimpers and stuff, they were just not wanting to retain wire because the crimps themselves just are of the worst quality. But I've got my fuel pump relay in here, and then I think I've got my fan on one of these circuits, things like that. So that is all going to be kind of temporary as far as that goes. I'm going to plan on cleaning all this up and possibly go to like a PDU unit. Then I've got my start button so I can actually start it without having to get in and out of the car. And I actually was running out of 5-volt sensor circuits, and so I split off the last one and brought it in. And so I've got 3 additional 5-volt sensor circuits on here, brought back to a Deutsch connector there that I can run in case I need to add some more sensors like fuel pressure, because right now I've got a manual fuel pressure gauge on the rail and one back at the regulator. I'll probably end up pulling the one on the regulator and putting a digital fuel pressure gauge or sensor on this and bringing that into the ECU also, even though we should be fairly consistent on our fuel pressure. This is also the connector for our Holley coil driver. It was right there. Had the thing just kind of mounted here, and then it was going over to our digital 6A and controlling spark. The cool thing about this 6A is you have a light on there, and you can see whenever the thing's not getting triggers properly, because this thing will blink. Even whenever it's running, it should look steady. It technically isn't steady. It is flashing every time it pulses a cylinder, and so the faster your RPMs are, the more that thing flashes. But whenever I was having issues with it, I could literally see this thing not getting trigger signals from the ECU. One of the other things I've got over here, I've got the wideband connectors, and I do have one of the wideband connectors to go over to the 4.2 sensor. I have brought an analog back from the 300300 gauge I have installed in the car, and so I'm bringing that in on channel 3. And I'll touch on a lot of this stuff whenever we get into the software side of setup and what all you have to do to get these things running. But as I said, I do have one of the connector sensors. They're like $60 what they ask for it. I don't think that it's necessarily worth it. I think you can buy the connector ends, and you know, they come with Amphenol, which are just the generic Deutsch connectors on this. And in fact, I swapped the ones out that were on this over to the bigger ones because they were using the smaller style connector, and so I went to the bigger one on that. And then this is the Aem Net Connector, and in fact, this one has the other side plug. I don't know that I've got any pins to go to the other side plug, but the dash will plug directly into this. The question is going to be whether or not the dash's lead is going to be long enough to get back into the cabin of the car or not. So that pretty much sums it up. You can see my shiny new chrome alternator, which I hate. I hate chrome. Chrome is the worst thing ever designed. But you know, you get what you can whenever you can. It's 100 amp, so we're up from the standard 60 amp to 100 amp. And then you can see my cute little crossover line here for the fuel, because there was just nowhere else for me to get from this rail over to this rail on the front side. And I liked having the feed and returns on the back because it was clean. Initially, I'd hoped that it would clear the water pipe here, the elbow coming off the thermostat and the water pump. I just could not get this thing situated in any way. So let me know what you think about my black arch of fuel here going over my filter. I don't actually hate it. It looks kind of cool. Okay, so that's the quick rundown of the Smoke Monster, where it's at on the EFI setup. We're just so close, and it's so frustrating. I took off Friday and Monday, you know, the past week to work on this thing, and honestly, this thing should have been running Thursday night. I've had this thing running since Thursday night. I've been fighting the issue with the coil driver since Thursday night, and finally hooking the thing directly up on the coil like it's shown on the Holley Sniper setup, because that's what it's designed for, is to take the points output from the Holley Sniper and directly drive a coil. As soon as I did that, as said, it melted that thing. So good job, Holley, yay. But I do have the Aem coil. It's supposed to be here tomorrow. I'm going to try it out. If I mean, even if I can't get some guidance on how they're going to say to do it, I'm going to swap it out. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, we're going to go ahead and do coil nerd plug because the big block has shipped. It will be here in a couple days. The short block will be here. Now, mind you, we still have a lot of parts special ordered, are back ordered that we're waiting on to be able to assemble the big block. So it might be interesting to see if we could get the big block swapped before the end of the year. And of course, at that point in time, even if we could get it swapped before the end of the year, we're not going to be able to drive this thing. I mean, it's just getting so cold around here. We had our first snow the other day, which is just an indication that going out and doing rips on the road is kind of disappearing. But we want to get the EFI set up, dialed in and working before that happens. And if that requires us to swap over to the coil near plug, get all that figured out, get the ignition stuff dialed in, that's what we're going to do. I'd much rather experiment on this cheap small block that is kind of nothing I care about than to have a, oh, there went my light, than to have the big expensive big block in there and you know, end up potentially hurting something that is a lot of money, because by the time the big block's all said and done, it's probably going to cost as much as the car cost. And so it's going to be a pricey piece of equipment, but it is going to be very robust, very powerful, and very reliable at the power numbers that it makes. We're not doing anything too extreme. We're just using a lot of cubic inches with a little bit of compression and a lot of airflow to make some serious horsepower. So the next video that we do after this, we're going to dive into the tuning side of it. I really want to get the thing running so I can walk through some of the menus on the Aem software, show you how we can make the adjustments on the fly. That's the cool thing that I've enjoyed about it so far. Aem actually has some decent videos just on the idle tuning portion. They didn't really do much after that. They literally put 3 videos out on idle tuning that are very informative. And I kind of use them to dial in the idle on this thing. But the nice thing about it is being able to go in there, take a look at it while it's running, hit a couple buttons, and shift your VE table to get the fuel trims to fall in line. Then on top of it, I'm going to show you how to log with this thing, take the log data, and use it to generate new volumetric efficiency tables, because there's not a way to do that built in. Software is a little bit lacking there. But for now, this is just where we're at. There will be plenty more to come. We're also going to be having some more tuning videos here soon, so stick around. You know the drill. Thanks for stopping by the garage. Remember, ABT, always be tuning.